as always, go nice and gently and easily. Get rid of that. So, feet about hip width apart. Let your hips sink just a little bit and turning from the middle of your body. Just with a nice steady rhythm, giving you a chance to warm up and to loosen up. It's comfortable for you to focus on your breathing, take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. And remember that in sort of Tai Chi terms, the warm-up has a slightly different quality to it, I suppose you could say. There's obviously a physical warming up, muscles and joints and so on and so forth, just beginning to get the blood flowing through them, working a bit more freely, warming the muscles up before there's any kind of extension, even if we're not stretching, that we're still using the muscles. But at the same time is this refocusing of your attention from what is normally kind of like quite strongly outward looking. There's anything wrong with that in most circumstances, but just to a more inward looking, quieter, gentler in a way space. One which you'll find that you keep sliding off very easily, so that your thoughts will kind of capture you and everything. And the thing is just to bring your attention back whenever that happens and get used to that, almost as part of the same rhythm as the movements that we do. The movements, remember, when we get to the main body of movements, we'll have this extending stage and a contracting stage. So if we learn now to focus on our body, so whichever aspect of the posture or the movement suits you for the moment, that becomes a habit. And so when we do Tai Chi, our thoughts are naturally drawn back to our center, to the ground beneath our feet. Again, whatever sort of way of describing it and experiencing it really suits you. As always, thinking about your basic posture serves that purpose, as well as the more obvious purpose of your posture getting better and everything that you might associate that with that physically. So your weight slightly forwards in your feet. This is exaggerated. I'm nearly falling forwards, but this will cause you to be drawn forwards by gravity. But gravity is also working on your hips, the lower part of your back. And if you just allow that area to drop back, you'll get drawn back to the upright stance. And you'll notice when I do that, that there's a curving in my knees. I'm trying to avoid saying bend your knees, but that is effectively what happens. But everybody thinks, well, not everybody, but one of the very common comments I get with people when they do Tai Chi is they find it difficult because they can't bend their knees. And it's like, don't think of bending your knees. If you think of bending your knees, there'll be a lot of kind of tension build up in your knees. Think of this as just sitting back and allowing your knees to soften, to allow that sense of dropping down, your pelvis hanging down, your center of gravity dropping. Again, whichever way you choose to regard the process of rooting down. And as you get used to this, and it is strong, you'll feel it here particularly in the thigh muscles. So as you get used to it, you'll begin to notice that it just naturally leaves this central area and everything above it looser. And so that loose quality in our hips and then in our shoulders, our back, is I suppose you could say in a way a kind of first stage that we look for in these arts. And then just raising your arms. When I use a term like first stage, I don't mean to imply that it's only a beginner's thing or something like that. Perhaps a foundation stage is a better way of describing it, because we always reckon that a foundation is the thing that everything else sits on. So what we're trying to do at the moment is just to release some of that tightness and stiffness that just naturally will build up, and hence the looser stage. And then just let your hands drop. So begin to just let your weight sway forwards and backwards. Try and keep that softness in your knees, hips dropping back. And imagine you're doing this in water. So the idea of doing it in water is so that we get two things out of this. I suppose they're related. One is a sense of support from the air around us, because water has a kind of buoyancy to it. But more particularly, that there's a resistance to the movement that requires more than just a loose quality, as I was describing it, but something a little bit more connected than that. Your hands come out to your sides. And as you go forwards, your hands get drawn forwards after you, and likewise going back. And just use that image of being in water to gradually program your body into moving differently. So one of the values of that focused attention, apart from its own inherent value in Tai Chi, is to really connect mind and body, and to use that connection to influence the one with the other. It's a two-way process. But in particular at the moment, what we're looking for is our body's response to an image or an idea or memory, whatever, in our mind, specifically this one of moving through water, which will gradually cultivate a more connected and a stronger feeling within the body. And then changing the arms a little bit, letting them come up, and imagine holding a tray of drinks. So a little bit more active with the arms, but making sure that they don't take over the movement. So retaining a quiet quality in the arms. The problem being is always that the arms will very quickly tend to dominate the movement, and we lose what's happening through the rest of the body. So this little exercise is really just to give you an idea of how it feels in your arms and your hands when they're following rather than leading. And this is a quality you want to maintain. So when the arms don't feel like this, it's a kind of message to bring your attention back once again to these foundation principles. So you could apply this process to all of the movements that we do. We want every movement to have that quality of looseness, moving from the ground, moving from your legs, moving from the center. so not straining in your shoulders. We also want all those movements to have that inner quality of us, something a little bit stronger and a bit more connected, which generally we would develop by applying an image of some kind, quite often as though we're moving through water. Now let your weight come to settle just behind the ball of each foot, or maybe a little bit further back, but not too far back. So you've still got that angling forwards, encouraging your hips to drop back. Bring your hands in as though you're now cradling a ball. Sink down a little bit more and pushing up so you're lifting the ball. And then turn your hands over. Sink your hips, feel your shoulders going down and the ball falling. And then push up. And sink. Hands are quite close to your body. And go carefully with your legs, especially as I say, if you're a bit out of practice or you're new to this. It's very strong in the muscles of the legs and the lower back. So rest if you need to, but in particular, don't think that the more you bend your knees, the better. It's really your hips dropping back further, not your knees bending more. If I bend my knees more, you'll see my knees overextend, and that's when they can start to strain. So rooting down, just focusing your attention on that feeling of gravity pulling you downwards, and on not resisting that, but rather trusting that as you sink down, your legs will carry more of the weight, of course, but they'll be fine. And eventually they'll just push you up again, and then gravity will take over and pull you down. And between those two movements, those two directions, downward with the pull of gravity, upward from your legs and your feet, again, a nice steady rhythm beginning to build and develop. Expanding, contracting. Expanding, contracting. So this exercise really, sometimes do it quite quickly, but once we do it every class, it's easy to overlook what's going on here, but there's several things. One is, of course, as the name suggests, rooting down. We're really establishing this physical foundation of the low center of gravity, and the stability that comes with that. And all that implies, the more stable you are, the less you're inclined to strain in the upper part of your body and so on. We also begin to appreciate this two-way dynamic of expansion and contraction, or following the pull of gravity down and feeling the, in a sense, the energy of the body pushing up. How those two are very much part of the same cycle of movement. Another thing that would always be present in all of the exercises, even when it's not obvious, the flow of the movement and the order of the movement are related. So by order is what I was talking about before. Your legs move the rest of your body, not your hands leading the body, for instance. And when that happens, the flow comes quite naturally. So there's various things going on in this very simple exercise that really we want to maintain all the way through. We'll change now. So hands out to your side, same thing in your legs. Just a slight variation in your arms, the wild goose. using the image of the bird in flight, if that's a good one for you, or maybe just staying with that image of moving through water. Try not to stiffen up in your shoulders as your hands go up and out to the sides. And then we'll change to parting the clouds, but with just one hand. So imagine painting a circle with your fingers. So I sink down as I push up. The expansion pushes my elbow out and draws my fingers around in a relatively small circle. That one didn't even reach above my head. Sometimes it will do, but it may take a while to build that. Just relax your shoulder and notice where your arm naturally wants to rotate. Don't think, oh, it's got to rotate here or something like that. So just observe, if you like, the natural movements of the body. Change to the other side. One more just with this hand. And then both hands together. The full movement part in the clouds. The image of which, the name I used to find a bit baffling. I couldn't really work out. I mean, just, put your hands up in the clouds and separate them, I suppose. But then I realized that it was really talking not so much about a kind of physical image as a feeling, this sense of opening out, when you're on a grey day when there's lots of low cloud cover, if the sun suddenly comes out from behind the clouds, that sort of expansive feeling is really, I think, what's going on in this movement. Being careful not to overdo the movement physically, don't over move the arms, don't, you should always feel as though you could have moved a little bit further. One more time. And then go back to the first of these, rooting down, do them as a little sequence. Take your time to finish each movement before you move on to the next. And just notice the change from one to another. Your legs are doing the same thing. Your hips are doing the same thing. So it's really from the hips upwards that you begin to feel slight changes, and focus on the area between your hips and your shoulders. Because it's in your sides and your back, your belly and your chest, that you'll really feel the subtle changes from one movement to another, where you feel the expansion and contraction, the connections in the movement. Once again, just training your attention to rest more within your body. And if you get out of sync, if you forget which one comes next, it's not the end of the world. One more round. Another thing about doing things in sequence is it makes you work just that little bit harder to maintain that focus of attention. Instead, it's very easy for it to slide off somehow. So now, hands drop down, and then dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Push up. At the top of the movement, just roll your fingers in. Little rotation through your shoulder. Well, like you're plucking an apple off a tree. And then on the other side. So here we get a chance to contrast or compare in our minds two sides of the body. Again, don't let your hand go up too high. A little bit above your shoulder, but you should still feel that you could have gone further. Don't rush the switch from one side to another. Think of your attention as being like a camera in a documentary film or something like that, where the camera pans across a landscape. It's not an abrupt switch from right to left or from left to right, but rather this scanning across, panning across before you start on the other side. It's not a rush. Do one more on each side. And then, actually, we're doing pushing in two directions to start off with, so don't do the turn. So bring your hands up, push up, hands slightly in front of your body. So you're just trying to hold up a low ceiling, and then down, and bring your hands back. And then raise up again, but let your elbows drop so you push out. So again, we've got two very similar movements. It gives us a chance to just feel subtle changes within the body. And remember that, particularly those of you who've been doing the little form class that I've got going, but some of the more complex exercises that we do anyway, that focused attention and that awareness of what's going on within your body are things that we would look to have in the more complex movements. It's harder, of course. So again, this is an exercise in its own right, but also excellent sort of preparation, if you like, in foundation principles for some of the more complicated movements. This time we'll also add the turn. So we also get, again, that feeling of moving from the center of the body. You push out, feel the turn in your hips and your waist. And back. And the other way. Remember, trying to keep your hips sinking back. And then facing the front and pushing out. Turning very much from the middle of your body when we do the turn, and making sure that you don't sort of push up through your legs. So what I want to do is I turn here. I don't want to stiffen up. See, when I stiffen up, everything tightens up. I want to keep nice and relaxed down there, leaving my hips dropping back. So we feel our center of gravity, our root, dropping down. Through the movement, the direction from the center part of our body, expanding outwards and contracting into that central area. And then your hands drop down, draw back, circling your hands over to just slightly above your head and down the center line of your body. Once again, your arm will just naturally rotate. Here your hand is palm out. But here as your hand comes down, the arm will rotate and gradually palm of your hand will turn. Don't agonize about that. Just let it happen as feels natural. And then if it's comfortable for you to do this, put a turn in here. Remember, this is quite strong, and it's really important when you turn to keep your body upright. So I can turn a long way, but I'm falling over now. So if I turn less, I keep the upright position, I keep my root, I keep the fluidity of the movement. Good. And then switch sides. Moving as far as you're comfortable moving. This is not a race or a competition. Again, if it's comfortable, turning. So listen to your body. That posture where we sink our hips back and drop our center of gravity helps to create a certain amount of space in the body. And it's within that space that we move. We don't strain against the boundaries of that space. And then just back to this movement, sinking down and pushing up. So you can see as I do this, as my hips sink back, my pelvis just naturally tucks under. Again, that's not something that we force, we just allow it to happen. And as a result, my body stays upright. But this time, if as I sink down, I deliberately tilt my pelvis forwards, then my head goes forwards, my shoulders go forwards. Now I allow my hips to drop back, and because the pelvis is right in itself, my head and my shoulders come up, and then I push up. So yielding to the pull of gravity through my hips helps me to come up without straining, without stiffening. Using the very sort of energy, the very force that might pull me over to actually help me to be upright. be careful with your back and your knees with this one. And then your arms following, rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. One more round. And give your legs a shake. And begin to just transfer your weight from side to side. So all those different elements are common to all of the movements. And whichever movement we're thinking of in Tai Chi, you know, whether it's just something that you've just started doing or whether you've been doing this for years, and there are lots of kind of forms and things like that, really the movements come down to a relatively small set of principles with variations, not on the surface exactly, but variations mostly through the upper part of the body. There's only so many ways you can move your body without hurting it in any case. So the phrase that always comes to mind when I talk about this is from the old writings in Tai Chi that the movement is rooted in the feet, released through the legs, controlled by the center of the body, and expressed in the arms. So we can begin to see how this works in all of the movements in one way or another. This time as you're moving, just let your hip come around. We're going to go into bear play. Most of you know this. And it's an exercise where we do take a few liberties with the movement. A lot of Tai Chi movements I would already be considered to be swinging my shoulders out too far. Particularly if it was one of the movements that came from the martial side of the art, because as soon as you're out here, you really are at risk. But this isn't directly related to the martial side. It isn't a fighting movement. There's also a little bit of a rise and a fall, which means that your hip and indeed your shoulder start to do a little bit of a circle. I'll show that from the side here, and it comes up and then down. If you look at my hand, you'll see the circle. That's a little bit exaggerated, just so you can see it. But try and feel that working, not just in your hip, but all the way through your upper body. Both directions. And let your shoulders sort of pick up on that movement. And again, this is certainly not something that we would get, say, in a Tai Chi form, this distinctive rolling of the shoulders. But now you can feel your arms beginning to follow. Your arms like the front paws of the bear. They're very fluid. A kind of softness there, but also quite strong. Even when you come up, don't lock up in your hips or your back. We're looking for this very smooth, massaging quality of movement in our back and our spine. And try and avoid this. So as I come up here, you can see I'm going to come over into this leg, and that movement up pushes the shoulder up, the turn takes the shoulder around and then down. Same thing on the other side. And as that happens, if the shoulder's going to do that, the elbow almost has to follow. If the elbow is going to follow, the wrist is going to follow because they're attached. And then the only thing we have to do that is extra to the movement coming from the hip is to just open up the wrist and the palm of the hand as you drop down. So you're pushing down on something. With this sort of almost swaggering quality to it. I'd like to think that bears swagger a little bit. I don't know, I've never seen one in the wild, so I'm probably talking rubbish, but I think if I was a bear, I'd probably swagger a bit because there's probably not a lot could get into an argument with me successfully. So bear play. And we're going to move from this to hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, which is one of the movements where we want to be more clear about the alignment of our shoulders to our hips. We won't be rolling our shoulders in the same way. Very much a focus into the idea of hitting a ball. So everything is sort of, in a way, kind of slimmed down to that action, except that internally we still want to feel this movement in our back and our hips and our spine. So this time you can mirror my movements coming down, turn out a little bit. So you draw your hand out, sinking in this leg, push through, push the hand up like a tennis racket or a bat, and then just let your heel come off the ground. Hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, back down, and on the other side. So you see the heel coming up allows the hip to come around more, and my shoulder stays in line with my hip. I'm not doing this. It's this, keeping the upright stance, keeping the line with the pull of gravity. Sinking into the foot, feeling the push up through your leg, your hip, the side of your body, through your ribs, into your shoulder, like a wave building through the body. So as we do this movement, it's very easy to get distracted by what our hands are doing. But think about this stage here. You could almost rest here. This is where you're really sinking down and you're feeling the push from the opposite leg, sinking down. You may have lost that sense of the ground, but you get it back here, and then you extend out again. It's like being on a trampoline. There is no upward movement without the downward movement. Remember what I was saying earlier about the way that the rhythm of the movement, not just the rhythm, but the dynamic of the movement, will bring your attention back to your center, to the ground, to your root. And all that's implied in that in terms of mind and body. One more time. and shake out. Remember that all of these ideas represent a very different view to movement and exercise to a kind of conventional Western one, just a complementary one, but it is different. And so don't be surprised if kind of even after some time of practice, you will find yourself with muscles aching and so on and so forth. Sometimes when I go and see one of my teachers, they'll say, I mean, I remember one of my teachers, Carell, saying that, you know, kind of like, got us to think about the hamstring muscles and what they were doing. And I remember thinking, this is going to be fun, because I was in Reading and I had a sort of 2-hour drive at the end of the class, and I knew what was going to happen. We were working so hard on the hamstrings. 2 hours driving was just long enough for them to really seize up. So I was kind of getting out the car like that. it had to sort of really work quite hard to loosen up my hamstrings. So don't disregard the physical side of this art. Now, from the parallel stance, turn one foot out, put the other one forwards, hip width across. So not too narrow a stance, about the same in length. And once again, just transferring your weight. So we could focus on the exchange between one leg or another, change from filling to emptying. And that's an important one, because we want to be able to have that going on in the back of our minds while we're doing other movements. Another good thing to focus on, is a bit more subtle, is again this sense of sinking down. So another thing we can do is, rather than just forwards, backwards, you sink back and you give yourself a moment to settle. And you feel the push from the leg after a while. And then you go forwards and you feel yourself settle. And then you feel the push. Again, like you're on a trampoline or a bouncy castle, you bounce up. You hit the trampoline, you don't bounce up straight away. The trampoline sort of gives, and you feel it give below you, and then it pushes you up, and it throws you up in the air, hopefully. But it wouldn't do it instantaneously, so it's not forwards, backwards. There's this, again, moment of rooting down, or just pause in a little bit, which, if nothing else, should help your attention just to settle as well. In that moment of pausing, you could just raise your foot. So if you're on your back leg, you just raise your toes. Don't do this. Just flex the ankle. And when you go forwards here, just let the knee drop forward so your heel comes up. And when you do that, more of your weight will be transmitted down through the supporting leg. You can have your front foot slightly turned out, but there's not too far, because you'll throw your knee out of line. But that does help to open the hip mostly. So that gradually more of your weight settles into your leg, but you maintain this upright posture. Don't lean. And when you're ready, if you're ready, just bring the foot in, take a step. Shout, if it's the front foot, put your heel down, lower your toes, move your weight. Going back, it's going to be the ball of your foot goes down first, then your heel. Use a wall or a table for support if you're feeling a bit wobbly, because part of the idea is just to remember and to learn to relax a little bit in the leg. Keeping your body in line, because if I lean over, I fall over. Remember that level pelvis. Consequently, it's quite a short step that we take. Shake hand. So again, a slightly different view of the stepping. If we were doing something like a strength and balance class or something like that, they might be encouraging you to take these really long strides. And to do that, you would be tilting the pelvis and stretching out and so on and so forth. It's a good thing to do, especially if you do have mobility problems. It's a useful thing to do, but it's not what we're trying to do in this particular exercise. So then on the other side, first of all, just a simple transfer of your weight. The angle between your feet should be comfortable for you. Ideally, at this stage anyway, you have your front toes pointing straight ahead. And the back foot, anywhere between 45 degrees and almost nothing really. It varies from person to person. To facilitate your weight dropping down through your hip into your foot. Let the ground carry your weight, not your hips or your knees, and certainly not your back or your shoulders, because you want that same fluid quality of movement in the back, of course. And then raising your toes and your heel, just to increase the amount of weight dropping down. Take your time. Learning to, in a sense, relax with the pull of gravity. The term we would use in Tai Chi is to yield. So relax doesn't quite encompass that, but what we often do is we strain against gravity constantly. So we think that that's what we have to do to remain upright. But again, there's a different approach here. If you're ready for this, just stepping in. And then going either forwards or backwards, depending where you might have the room. Just take a couple of 3 steps. You need to have that sense of focusing of your attention somewhere in the back of your mind. Maybe you're focusing on it more, but at the very least it needs to be there so that you're kind of monitoring your alignment with the pull of gravity, your connection to the ground, so on and so forth. And bring your feet back. So it's quite tricky. We work to develop a kind of background awareness that ticks away, and people sometimes say to me, that they've been doing Tai Chi for a while, and then they were standing at the bus stop or walking down the road and suddenly realized they were walking differently or something like that. This awareness gradually builds up, I think. So sink your weight into your back foot. Hold your hands over your belly. Push forwards and let the push your elbows out in front. Feel the expansion in the front of your body. Hands separating, pushing your arms out. So there's a ball there. It's just expanded. Push your hands out and then contracts as your weight goes back. Folding over. Expanding and contracts. This pigeon spreads its wings. So called because the feel of it, if not the actual physical posture, is that there's a slightly bell-chested quality here, I think, in the front of the body. And then your hands drop down to your sides. Fisherman cast a net, move your weight forwards, like in the very first exercise that we did, pulling your arms through, like you're throwing a sheet over a bed. Good, and then sink back, elbows come out just a little bit and palms forwards, pushing a wave or pushing a boat. Movement that starts roughly in line with your hips. The weight moves forwards and your arms curve up a little bit. Good, just below the shoulders. Good, and shake it. Have your other foot forwards. So same three movements, starting with pigeon spreads its wings. Expansion your belly, the solar plexus up into your ribs and chest. Back down into the back leg. Again, try not to let your arms lead the movement. You want the sense of movement, of energy from your legs and from the ground to be the sort of main driving force behind your arms. Now, of course, movements, patterns within the upper body, as we've been discovering, but even those sort of have their origins really in this basic movement of your weight changing, the push up from the ground, the sinking down into the ground, all those things that we were looking at right at the start. And then change into fisherman cast a net. So this is where they become, again, background, because quite a lot of the focus of your attention will be on the actual exercise, the image, the details of the exercise. So we want those basic principles to become quite sort of intuitive to us. One more time. And pushing away. Once more. And bring it back. Shake it. Rubbing your hands together, the fingers and palms a little bit warm. And then the pads of your fingers to start off with, just tapping lightly over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. The other side. Lightly on your back, just as much of the back as you can get to without straining. Around your hips. Legs. Light on your belly. And onto the upper part of your chest. And shake out. Okay, so Embrace Tiger, return to the mountain. Again, literally sort of like exemplifies, I think, this idea of returning. And if it suits you, the image of the mountain, still and calm but quite strong, is there for you to work with. And the tiger would normally represent just the sort of ups and downs of everyday life, I suppose. But coming back to this more rooted, centered feeling, and feeling how you come back to that, what it is that draws you back to it. So sinking down a little bit, push up. If it suits you to work with your breathing, take a breath in and then breathe out as you bring your arms around as though you're going to hold a ball against your chest. You breathe in again, drawing your hands in, and breathe out, sinking down. As ever, breathing patterns are optional, breathing isn't. So one of the reasons I don't put too much emphasis on breathing patterns, and suggest them occasionally, it's just this approach in Tai Chi that suggests that breathing is quite natural, and if we get the posture right and we get the movement right, our breathing will be right. But if we impose a way of breathing or a breathing pattern on the body, we risk creating tension. But you might want to try every now and then just to follow a particular breathing pattern or way of breathing, see how it feels. Well, there's plenty else going on. So what is it that sort of draws you back to this quieter feeling for a moment? One more time. And stand. Just stand with an awareness of your posture, your breathing, awareness of the pull of gravity working through you. Just a sense of the place where you're standing as well. And shake out. Thank you very much once again, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you. What happens next Monday?